Nicholas, good to have you here.
G'day, Sam.
I know that you've been an economist for many years and have influenced policy in Australia. So I was wondering if you could just begin by introducing yourself and tell me a bit about your career journey and background.
Nicholas Gruen's my name, and I think the most important thing to know about me as an economist is that I was doing economics long before I studied economics. So I studied economics at university a few decades ago, but I got brought up by an economist, and that meant that I got the hang of an economic way of thinking much earlier on in life than most economists. And in fact, in my opinion, lots of economists are not all that good at using the tricks and tools in the economic toolkit, because they're rather mistaking their discipline as a badge of tribal identity, if you like, rather than as a way to start thinking about problems and come to a solution which might surprise them. So that's, I think, the most important thing. I started practicing economics again before I studied it in 1981, and then in 1983 working for Australia's Industry Minister John Button and looking at the car industry. So I studied economics quite a while after that, but I certainly felt very comfortable participating in economic discussion and in fact framing economic policy to try and solve the problems of the car industry way back in the 1980s.
So how would you say economists see the world? What is it about their lens that differs from people of other backgrounds?
So economists typically think of themselves as thinking about incentives, and they think about, and so rather than, if you give them a problem like people are paying too much rent, economists will be very quick to see that if you pass a regulation which says people aren't allowed to charge rent above a certain figure, if you regulate rent, they'll be very quick to go looking for the ways in which that can go very wrong. And in fact, there's a nice saying that my father used, which was there was only one way more sure of destroying a city than bombing, and that was rent control. So it's a way of looking at things and not thinking of and being suspicious that you can tell people what to do without there being all kinds of secondary effects. So that's one of the most important things that economists do. Unfortunately, economists have become the philosopher kings of our world. So economics is probably the most important discourse, the most important, the most important discipline in which people think about how to run our society. And that's a real problem, because economists, in trying to boil down their discipline, have boiled down human beings into purely self-seeking animals. And we are self-seeking, but we're also members of families. We're fathers and children and mothers. And so it's in certain circumstances incredibly, crazily wrong to think that that the best question is to just say what's in these people's self-interest, and then to assume that that's what they'll do. That's okay in the stock market in many ways, but it's okay in a vegetable market in certain senses. But there are lots of parts of life where it's not all that. It's just going to be one part of the picture. So that's a downside of the dominance of economic thinking and the oversimplicity that economists have in thinking about the world.
While there may be some shortcomings to the assumptions that they make when trying to understand and influence how we should act in the world, I do think that it does provide, as you were saying before, practitioners or people with valuable lenses through which to view issues not just relating to policy and government and more social issues, but just everyday issues and issues relating to businesses and the list goes on. So what do you think it is about the economic viewpoint, or just the way of thinking about the world, that lends itself to, well, that provides great utility when thinking about these things? I know you mentioned incentives, but I thought you might have something more to add there.
Well, what do you want to suggest? Well, what other kinds of things are you thinking of? Because my mind goes to the limitations of economics and ways in which something like design thinking has injected all kinds of fantastically valuable things into business that economists are pretty much blissfully unaware of. So that's where my mind is, but you may be thinking of other things, so tell me what they are and I'll...
Yeah, like opportunity costs, probably one of the best examples.
I completely agree with you. The idea of opportunity cost, and for somebody who doesn't know what opportunity cost is, it is a way of thinking about the relative costs of decisions, which isn't their accounting costs. So if I go on a holiday and it costs $2,000, then that's the accounting cost is $2,000, but the holiday will be over 1 week of my life or 2 weeks of my life, and I could do a whole lot of other things, and maybe I could go and look after a sick grandmother. And so so each of these things has an opportunity cost. And so long as you don't get seduced into the idea that everything is easily measurable in dollars and cents, the idea of opportunity cost from economics is an excellent frame within which to make that decision about whether to stay and look after your grandmother or go on the holiday. You can tote it up and you can then make some kind of judgment. And that's certainly true in business, and it's particularly true in bureaucracy, because in bureaucracies, the people at the top make decisions and they actually often don't care that much about the costs they impose on others, or if they do, they don't actually know about the costs that they impose upon others. So that's why, and I expect we'll get onto this, but that's why information flows within organizations are so tremendously important, because I always make the assumption that people are doing the best they can. They're not being that cynical, they're not being that selfish, but often they end up making fairly self-centered decisions because that's the perspective they have. They're sort of doing their best, but they're doing their best from what they know. And there's lots more to know. And the thing is that the people at the bottom are the people that we know least about because of all the mechanisms whereby the people at the bottom are showing their respect to the people at the top, and the people at the top rather forget that it ought to be a more reciprocal arrangement.
You're an investor in the end-to-end freelancing platform Speedlancer.
Yep.
And I'm curious about what is it about the company that motivated you to back it?
Lots of things, and I wouldn't want to say that it's too scientific a process. I'm fairly intuitive about these things. I ask basic questions like, do I trust the people who are running it? Because I certainly am not going to be doing due diligence all over all the paperwork, only because, well, partly because that doesn't interest me, but also because you could get the best lawyers and the best accountants in the world to look at it, and it tells you very little about a startup. So those are some basic questions I ask. And I like to be engaged in solving a big problem, but I don't want to suggest that I've got too many delusions of grandeur. You can be making a small contribution to a big problem, but the idea that you're part of solving a big problem is a big deal for me. It's a nice idea but this may shock some people, but not necessarily the most important thing, that I might make lots of money out of it. But this idea that if things work out, you might make lots of money, and you might help a problem being solved in the world, and you might be able to build some, that you might be part of something where, at least in the case of Speedlancer and quite a lot of the other companies I've invested in, you might build a whole bunch of great lives for people who might not otherwise have them. I don't say that, I don't think, out of a kind of intrinsic goodness. It's intrinsically exciting. It's going to give me some exposure to something that I won't otherwise experience. And that's better than driving a Maserati. I can go and do that, I can just go and get a test drive. It's just not that exciting. And they're gonna stick me in a box in not too long. So I've got to try and have a good time, try and do good things, enjoy my life, and feel that it's been as worthwhile as it can be, even though I still agree with Woody Allen when they say, does he want to live on in his films? And he says, I'd rather live on in my apartment. That's very much the way I feel about it, but I don't get the choice.
So Speedlancer connects companies around the world to hand-picked freelancers across with a variety of skill sets, and handles a lot of the project management there. And one of the core components of this model is this idea of workflows. So bundled tasks that have been bundled together in sequence that can be run through the system. Now, in previous conversations, I've heard you speak about this model using a metaphor of a bridge connecting to a castle, and that castle is a separate company, like maybe a KPMG or just any company you could think of, and
a big company, particularly a big company.
A sizable company, and you talk of Speedlancer as providing the bridge across the moat into these companies, giving them access to the world of talent that exists outside of that. So I was just wondering if you could talk me through this metaphor.
Sure. So we're recording this a week or more, probably about 2 weeks after the Capitol Hill insurrection, when a whole lot of people invaded the US Capitol. One of the things that's going on there is that a lot of those people feel that they're outsiders. They feel that the world is being run for the insiders, and I'm afraid it is. Now, it's, again, according to my philosophy, most of the insiders are not running it for the insiders because they're evil people, but because that's the best they can do. And if you're in a big company and you want good work done and you want a lot of collaboration between people doing different things and a lot of coordination, then you end up in a situation where you pay a very large amount you pay relatively high wages, and you get highly educated people, or at least people who are stamped highly educated, the best you can hire from the labour market, and you get them all in a building. Now we're starting to experiment with not having them all in the building, but typically you get them all in the building, they're all in close proximity. They've all got a lot to lose, really, because they could drop out of this charmed, highly paid world. And out of this, you construct pretty high quality workflows, and you pay a lot of money for that. Maybe, I don't know, twice as much as you would ideally need to pay, maybe 4 times as much as you would need to pay. So we have these castles, mostly in developed countries, America, Europe and so on, but also in developing countries with lower incomes. And then we have talent everywhere. Everywhere you look, people can do amazing things. Some of them are well educated, some of them are not that well educated, some of them could specialise in a particular thing. And we're seeing an explosion of this sort of thing since the internet. Just go look at YouTube, and people have built incredible lives for themselves, so long as they've been able to develop a particular talent that connects with an audience. So there exists the same potential all around the world for people to be part of PwC's workflow or General Motors workflow, Toyota's workflow, IBM's workflow, but they're not. And they're not for the wrong reason. They're not because it's not that they're not good enough or couldn't get the support sufficient to be good enough. It's just that it's too hard. It's too hard to find them. And once you find them, if you're sitting in a big company, and once you find them, you've got to build a mechanism for them to collaborate with lots of other people. It's just too hard. And anyway, you're charging a huge amount of money for your own services. And so we have this castle, and the castle is well armoured, hard to penetrate from some person in another country without a certificate from Harvard or wherever they'd like you to have a certificate. And so what Speedlancer is going to try and do, and I've had numerous conversations with Adam, and there's a long story which I won't go into, which brought home my wariness about how hard this is going to be to do. But Speedlancer is trying to build a ramp, an on-ramp into that castle, and it's going to be a first big step to saying anyone who wants to can try and get onto this, get into the castle, get onto this high quality workflow. And we're going to try and do the work in Speedlancer to make it happen. And we're not under any illusion that that's an easy thing to do, because if it was an easy thing to do, guess what? Someone would have done it.
I think one of the points you hit on there was the challenges of constructing effective and efficient workflows. And one of the reasons why companies exist is because they can bring that talent in-house, they can coordinate people, they can share expertise. It's more efficient to have people, sharing a room and sharing expertise and, working together in that way. Now, Speedlancer is a remote-first company, and everything happens remotely.
As with this interview.
Of course, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I guess I have two questions here. What are the challenges that you see associated with piecing together workflows, so sequences of different tasks that come together to form a complete project? What challenges do you see with constructing a company that can continuously or deliver high quality workflows, and why do you think that will be a challenge? And I think in previous conversations you've mentioned the importance of tacit knowledge, so I'd be curious about how that fits into this analysis.
Yeah, so let me take you and the listener into a little bit of an excursion in. So what is tacit knowledge? The classic example of tacit knowledge is that anyone who can ride a bicycle can't really say that much about how they do it. They can say a bit. They can say that if the bicycle's falling left, you turn left, and so on. But in fact, what you build into your muscle memory are a vast number of things, and you actually you couldn't even begin to express all the things you do. But here's the kicker: even if you could begin to express it, or even you could express it all, it wouldn't be any use to you, because you don't access the knowledge in that way. You access the knowledge in a much more intuitive way. Now, if riding a bicycle seems like we don't ride bicycles when we're doing work, when we're doing office work most of the time. So is that an unusual example? Well, no. Think of the sentence that I'm trying to come to the end of right now, and have now come to the end of. All of the words I pulled out of my head, if that's where they came from, the order that I put them in, the grammar, that's all tacit knowledge. So tacit knowledge is the iceberg, and the explicit knowledge that we can encode by writing a letter is the tip of the iceberg. And this is true generally. So if you want to win an Olympic gold medal, reading about how to do it doesn't help you very much. You have to train your body, your mind, in all of these, in this process of directing tacit knowledge to a purpose. But here's the thing: in a workplace, you get another degree of difficulty because you're layering the tacit knowledge of one person on the tacit knowledge of another, and you are trying to build a system in which the knowledge of collaboration and cooperation between knowledge has somehow been systematized to support people learning it, but not to interfere with their ability to improvise, to do the right thing by the process. So that's the task, and it's not an easy one, and it certainly explains why we've been talking about the death of the office. Literally, this stuff started being written about. It must have been written about when the telegraph was invented in the middle 19th century, but it was certainly started to get talked about towards the end of the 19th century with the telephone, and then with television, and then with the internet. We've always heard that we're going to remember the paperless office and the remote and telework, and yet there's something that makes it hard. So telework is very efficient when it works well. It's more efficient than office work. You don't have to pay for the office, and people don't have to get into a car and spend an extra hour or two of their time going to and from work. So there are lots of potential benefits, and yet it's been quite remarkably slow. And it's going to get a big kick along from COVID. There's no doubt about that. And Speedlancer is going to be part of that process of finding ways to corral, to support remote work and remote collaboration, and then to deliver it into high quality workplaces, which will be depending on that work being high quality.
In some of our previous discussions, related to workflows and this challenge, you've mentioned the Toyota production model. Now, what lessons do you think could be learned in this context from that model? Do you think?
Let me answer that by going back a step and saying and issuing a word that you probably, if I've mentioned it to you, you'll know what it means, but your listeners won't. And the word is an ancient Greek word, and the word is isegoria. It's a political concept. It's a political concept from ancient Athens. It doesn't mean freedom of speech, it means equality of speech. It's something which matters a lot to me. It's what the Capitol Hill riots were about. Those people were saying, I can't hear my voice reflected in my political culture. Now, what's that got to do with Toyota? Toyota was the first company to actually show that all this stuff about people being our most important resource that you hear about, that was something that needed a lot of commitment, a lot of insight, a lot of collaboration to be delivered. And if you learn about how they did it, they basically support workers on the line, they support their suppliers. So they took a model, the American model, which basically said to workers on the line, you turn up for piece rates, which means we pay you by how many nuts you manage to put on the car wheel. So the faster the better. And you have to turn up at 7 a.m. and we'll tell you whether you've got a job you turn up at 6 a.m. and we'll tell you if you've got a job at 7:30 a.m. and we won't give you much training. It's straight actually out of an economics textbook in some ways. It's the way economists thought then, and it's the way, in many ways, economists still think now, although they have to catch themselves doing it, because I'm sure they would know that was probably not a very highly productive way to work. And what Toyota did was it gave workers 10 times as much training. It gave them all kinds of informational tools. It made a promise to them, which is that we want to help you work on problems which you see in the production line, our work will be all about keeping the line moving if we can, but mainly our task is to notice the problems that are there and solve those problems every hour, every day. And if you see, for instance, a problem that's bad enough on the line as the line is moving, there is an and-on cord, a cord that you can pull, everything stops. The promise is made to the worker that a supervisor will turn up pretty much instantly and try to solve that problem within the work period that the and-on cord has been pulled in. So that was seen by Western consultants as, that was called just-in-time management, and Western consultants thought that was about reducing inventory costs, because one of the things about Toyota factories was that they would order inventory, that is, they would order parts from parts suppliers as they used it. They didn't have piles of, a week or more supply of brakes sitting out in the car park. That wasn't really what it was about. What the and-on cord is about is a promise to management that they are serious, that they want workers to solve problems, that they want workers to take very seriously the idea that everything they do is right first time. So the surfacing of ways to do things better, the surfacing of problems, the seeing of one's task in terms of one's customers, which on an assembly line will be the next station along. These are things which everybody talks about, and Toyota showed that there's not that much point in talking about them. You'll just end up with the sort of frustrations that everyone in that situation has had for 50 years. But they showed that you could build a kind of upside down world in which the problems were solved by the workers on the line, and this and-on cord was a promise, which was, we're serious about this. And so that's what I found so incredibly exciting about the Toyota production system when I encountered it in 1983 when I was working on the car industry with Industry Minister John Button. I've been more than a little, I've been pretty disappointed that economists, and this is a piece of jargon you don't really need to know if you're listening too much about what it means, but economists think of this whole new system not as an exciting thing to sort of master how it was done and what it might mean for other situations. They just say, oh, that's a rightward shift of the supply curve. That's a new, that's a technological improvement. Well, we know that. The question is, what are the principles? What does it show us? And for me, I know this is a long answer, but for me, this gets back to that word I used, isegoria, which is that there's so much knowledge of the people doing the work. It's not very surprising. It's not very surprising that they have huge amounts of knowledge, unique knowledge that managers don't have. It's not surprising that if we can mobilize that, we're going to do fantastic things. The question is, how do we stop saying it and actually do it? We need a methodology for doing that. We need a disciplined methodology for doing that. Toyota's done it for car manufacturing and a whole range of large business processes. Speedlancer needs to do it in its way in a very different situation.
And just to expand on that point, do you mean specifically with the construction and development of workflows and the basic systems around the organization?
Well, let's say that somebody in India and somebody in Bangladesh cooperating in producing a video or doing some copywriting, and one of them says that the other one was late, and the other person says that that wasn't the problem, this was the problem. Okay, now Speedlancer needs to work out methodologies for not for kind of getting involved and arbitrating those things, but it needs to build a system in which neither of these two people feel demonized. These people, their goodwill remains intact, Their desire to learn together remains intact. The system has the intelligence to encourage that and then ultimately to systematize something so that some solution that's arrived at in that situation starts to become known to other people, known to other parts of the system, and start. I'm a little loath to use the word scale because we've got this idea of scaling as something you flip a switch like a Google server and you've scaled. And I think it's a better idea in this kind of context to talk about grown or incubated, or another model I think of is that our job in management and in building the Speedlancer system is to build a skeleton, and then the flesh needs to grow on that skeleton. And then, of course, what does flesh do to skeleton? It changes the skeleton, and the skeleton changes the flesh. So these things have to continually interact, but they still need to have a degree of stability, so that they create routines and we can actually solve problems and then go on to noticing the next set of problems and and start to work on some of those.
Yeah, I really like the idea of that, because it's, rather than imposing a decision or a framework from the top down, it's inviting the constituent elements to, in a way, arrive at a solution that works best for them, and like the solution emerges.
And look, another idea is span of control or multiple objectives. So there are so many objectives that you need to satisfy. The obvious ones are you need to satisfy the customer at a cost that is acceptable and you can make money doing. But there are millions of objectives. You want to keep people happy. You want to keep people feeling that they're doing something useful and ideally something that's going somewhere. You want to give people a degree of flexibility, but you also have to make what they're doing dependable to themselves and to the people that they work with. Their managers have functions. They're not just singing Kumbaya up there. So this is so business, these exercises are always and everywhere exercises in actively making trade-offs, which again we get back to the idea of opportunity cost that you mentioned earlier.
You kind of alluded to it at the very start of this conversation, and I know that it's a sentiment that is shared by definitely Adam, the CEO. But you see Speedlancer as not only a way for companies to get quality work done more effectively or efficiently, but also as a way of transforming people's lives. Now, I think you spoke a little bit about that before, but perhaps you could just expand on what you were saying, and what sort of opportunity do you think Speedlancer has here to make a mark on the world?
It turns out that the big moves, certainly in business organisation, the really exciting developments have, the ones I know about, have come through a process of understanding that the people who are doing the work, who are often the people of the lowest status in the organisation, the people on the line in a manufacturing business, the people out in the field if you're in government and they're delivering services, that those people have huge amounts of valuable knowledge about what they're doing. And in government work, it's also the communities that they're part of. And what happens is that the managers and those managers, senior managers, put themselves in charge, and even if they do so with the best will in the world, they don't actually know much about the texture of the work on the ground, what's necessary, what's not necessary, but they get involved in all kinds of processes which govern what is done and what is not done and what can be done and what can't be done. And so almost inevitably, they demoralize the people at the bottom. Because they feel ignored, disrespected, and so you fairly quickly get to what I would call a low trust equilibrium, where they're doing their work, they're sort of doing the best they can, the managers are doing the best they can, but you know, they would rather not be working, they'd rather be at home doing something else. And then there is a high trust or a high morale equilibrium that one is searching for, in which people feel I mean, this sounds like a little cliched, but they feel their whole being, their whole selves being part of this work. They feel their desire to be better at what they're doing, they're better technically at what they're doing, better in their non-work lives because they're better providers, better carers or whatever. They feel that these things have some harmony and that each is contributing to the other. And so I spoke earlier about Toyota. The beauty of Toyota was that they got so much more productivity out of treating people better. And the trade-off in the old low trust, low morale hierarchy was, if you wanted to treat people better, that was nice, but it would cost you. And they showed that the two things went together. And that's what I'm hoping is going to happen. What I'm hoping is going to be absolutely front of mind within Speedlancer at all levels. How do we solve problems in a way that is the best way to do it, not just the lowest common denominator way to do it? And if we do that, I call that building great lives. It's very pragmatic. It's still work. People might rather be at an amusement park some of the time, but it's satisfying. It's part of what we were made to be doing down here.
And that idea extends not to just those living in what you could consider to be more developed countries, but those who may live in places where they just don't have the opportunities that many of us are afforded in countries like Australia or the United States or Europe.
Exactly, and there's a sort of simple idea of leapfrogging which kind of started getting about in the 1990s and the early noughties with the internet and so on. And that idea of leapfrogging was that in Africa and India there would be very little in the way of installed telephone capacity. No one would have a line going to their house. They would leapfrog directly to phones, and then they'd leapfrog directly to smartphones. In fact, one of my investments is in a company that does a lot of data compression to simulate 3G phones on 2G phones in Africa particularly. So that's a whole technology that is born of a unique situation that you would never expect. It's not going to pop up in Australia. It's not going to solve that many problems in Australia and America, but it's solving problems right now in Africa. So Speedlancer can be the home of hundreds of those if we play our cards right, and if the people on the platform feel that we really want them to succeed in doing this stuff, and that, to be frank, we won't rip them off when they've done it, that we all want to share in the benefits of doing something great.
Just perhaps just lingering on the Toyota production model just a bit more, why do you think so many companies have failed to implement similar solutions or similar ways of organizing and operating together? Because it's nothing new. I mean, like you said, you heard about it in the early 80s, but it's treating your employees not too well and not really investing in them, and empowering those at the front with a degree of autonomy and ownership, I wouldn't say is especially common, even though it's perhaps spoken about quite often. Now, why do you think there's that disconnect?
Because it's hard. Because there's a marvelous story of one of the architects of the Toyota production system, an American statistician and musician, of all things, called Edwards Deming. And he talked about things like the andon chord, which I mentioned earlier, the ability of any worker on the line to stop the line if there's a problem. American consultants, American car companies came to Toyota and brought their notebooks and they wrote down what was happening. And as Edwards Deming said, they come, they write everything down, they go home, they try to copy our system, but they don't know what to copy. So they saw the andon chord as some magical thing. And of course, if you put an andon chord in a factory run in a traditional way, no one will pull it until eventually you tell everyone, no, you're supposed to pull it. And then someone will pull it and there's complete chaos and buck passing and finger pointing and all the rest of it. So what you can, and again, in a way, it's not quite the same. There's nothing all that tacit about the knowledge in the Toyota production system, but it is a bit like the tip and the iceberg. The andon chord is a visible manifestation of a whole philosophy and a whole way of operating, and it's a cultural, social, and a technical system, and it's in a kind of an equilibrium, and there are many parts to it, and one of the most critical parts is, for instance, the one-line answer to your question is have a look at what senior executives pay themselves. They don't do that in Toyota. I'm not sure what they do now, but certainly for a long time, Toyota's executives got paid substantially more than workers on the line and far less than Western executives. So they saw what they were doing as something which wasn't just for the money, I suppose. But anyway, that's in a way that doesn't get to the heart of it, because the heart of it isn't just interests, it is doing the work. And they've done the work, and the work is that there's many parts to it, and there are many things, and they overlap and reinforce each other. And they're hard to copy, but they can be copied. There are hundreds of firms that have copied them. And they tend to be in very competitive industries like manufacturing, because if they don't copy them, someone who does copy Toyota will wipe them out. In more oligopolistic industries like banking, retail in Australia, not so much.
I remember you saying something along the lines of, who would you rather be, Mark Zuckerberg or Muhammad Yunus? So who is Muhammad Yunus, and what sparked that statement or that question?
So Muhammad Yunus is an economics graduate. He went, I think, to Harvard. It might have been another Ivy League school. He's an Indian. He went to Harvard and he studied economics, and I think he probably studied poverty as well. He looked at and developing the development economics, which is the economics of development in poor countries, like his country at the time, India. And then he went back to India and he saw women weaving baskets and selling the baskets, and they were essentially operating according to a system which is called debt penury. And debt penury is that you're always in debt and you get sold or lent the resources for your next bit of production, but you're never given a big enough break that you can ever escape this. So they would pay the source of supply for the cane to make the baskets was all tied up by the people who managed them, and they were in debt to those people, and they were basically in penury for their whole lives. And Muhammad Yunus worked out, I think it might have been a case of if he could lend $3 American to one of these women, the trajectory would get above the line instead of stay in debt penury. And so and then he thought, well, that's funny. My economics, I've got a PhD in economics, and it hasn't given me a single way to think about this. And anyway, he just took a great interest in it, and he came up with a system which is a few little wrinkles, starts with some respect for these women and for their capacity to build better lives for themselves. And then he worked out that, or somehow maybe he experimented, I'm not sure of the exact origin of this, but as I understand it, the Grameen Bank, which he started, lends micro... Anyway, I do know that some of the first successful exercises of this was never lending to a single woman. He lent to groups of 8 and more women, and he lent on a cooperative basis. And what does that do? It brings in a whole lot of social and cultural qualities. And so this made a huge amount of difference. And the repayment rate was something like 99%. And he got the Nobel Peace Prize for having come up with this. And there are now lots of microcredit organisations, and I invested in a startup that provides microcredit and data analysis and basically funnels money from Wall Street into Kenya and a number of other places. The amount is about $300 for solar electricity installations, particularly in businesses. So microcredit has taken off, but Muhammad Yunus pioneered this, and it turned out that all the expertise he was fitted up with at the best universities in the world didn't help him really at all. And he got the Nobel Peace Prize. And I said to you guys, if I got the choice between being, and it's a grandiose thing to say, but if I got the choice between being Muhammad Yunus and Mark Zuckerberg, I'd take Muhammad Yunus. I think I looked up Muhammad Yunus' net worth is 10 million bucks or something, you know. That's good. That's enough. That's enough. And you know that millions probably of people have escaped a really horribly oppressive fate to chart their own course in the world and then do so for their children and their communities and so on. So what's there not to like?
And that ties right back into Speedlancer as a potential vehicle.
Absolutely, in 1,000 ways. In 1,000 ways. So I don't know whether I'm right about this, but when I never really understood why Amazon was likely to be as successful as it was, and I finally worked out, as I say, I don't know whether I'm right about this, but I think what they're doing is they're sort of applying Uber's methodology for taxis to 100 different product lines. This idea of having very strong data front end and finance front end to basically do things better than other people. And Speedlancer is going to, all these workflows, in every one of them, it's a new world. There are new problems to solve. It is, if it's going to be effective, an effective channel into the castle, bridge over the moat into the castle, and great lives can be built, and they'll be built themselves, building those bridges and expanding them and finding new ones and all that sort of stuff.
So I guess, what potential do you think Speedlancer has for growth? How big can this get?
Oh, look, it can get very big, but that's a bit like asking a football team after their third win in the season whether they think they're going to win the grand final. I think it can be an exceptionally big and successful business. Somebody else could also run off with the business, but it can certainly be very big. I think one of the exciting questions to ask is, if we are successful, will we be successful in the fairly traditional way of attracting some great investors and doing great work and building a great company? Or will some of the most important developments be people we don't even know of right now? People sitting around deciding that they want to, that they won't just freelance on Speedlancer, but that they will try to build the next 5 years of their life at Speedlancer with a view to the next 5 years and the next 5 years, and feel that we're all in that adventure together. It won't be a sure run thing, and nor should it be a sure run thing, but I would like to think that they would feel that we have their back, that we really want to support that, and we want to support it out of the goodness of our heart and the thickness of our wallets, both. We want to make it work for them, and we want to make it work for us. And I'd go further and say, if we have to choose, we have to make it work for them, not for us. That's the sort of promise that I think is necessary, to say, no, you guys come first, because, and why? It's not out of the goodness of our hearts, it's because we understand how little we know, how much of it, how the degree to which we are at a disadvantage knowing what might be possible on the line. That's why I think that should be the philosophy.
And that fits directly with what I think perhaps Adam called your 3 utopian visions. We kind of spoke about 2 of them, Toyota's production system, microcredit, and I think the other is open source, and Speedlancer could perhaps be the 4th.
Oh yeah, well you can, I was thinking after that, you can talk about the internet itself as a kind of miracle, but that's right. So open source software, if you think of Toyota, if you think of microcredit, if you think of open source software, these are things, how did they become so successful? And the answer, I think, is that they solved this problem of communication throughout an organization and empowered the people at the bottom. And that's much harder to do than giving a TED Talk saying that you're doing it. So here we are giving the TED Talk, and the question is, can we do it?
Yeah, and just that point on open source, like the fact that a lot of these people do this incredible work for free, and they coordinate and build things like Linux or Wikipedia. It's just remarkable, and that goes against a lot of economic thinking as well, doesn't it?
It does. It does. There was I have a fondness for the very first modern economist called Adam Smith, and it didn't go against his thinking, because he thought of right at the beginning of his famous book, The Wealth of Nations, he talks about an inherent tendency human beings have to he calls it truck, barter and exchange. In other words, to interact in a market with a view to advantaging themselves without disadvantaging others, but their main focus is themselves. And he actually says at that point that maybe, and he's writing in the 18th century, and he's actually thinking about Isaac Newton, believe it or not, and he's thinking about Isaac Newton's extraordinary theory of gravity, which creates an entire world from a single principle, and that principle is gravity. And Adam Smith's trying to do the same thing with this inherent tendency to barter, to truck, to exchange in a market. But just after he says that, he says, but maybe the most fundamental drive inside us is the drive to persuade. Maybe bargaining is really a process of one person wanting to persuade another of their point of view. And so Adam Smith understands that we have this drive to be understood by one another. And that's an explanation for why people write blogs for nothing, why Web 2 took off. Because economists wouldn't have predicted that. Why should I take my time to have a really good picture and stick it up on Instagram? Well, it turns out that we're intensely social, but the way we've built those societies is still we can do a lot better. And the way we've built our cultures, including our work cultures, is very status conscious. And there's a huge amount of productivity and fun, if I might say so, by allowing by giving voice to and helping to support and systematize the aspirations and the work of the people on the line, the people in the field, the people doing the work.
Yeah, and I think a common thread that weaves through all of those, the Toyota production system, microcredit, open source, and, Speedlancer here, is the idea that that respect for the individual, the investment of time, or the investment in the person, can translate into, well, most obviously, or at least in this context, benefits for the company. I mean, for us, leverages, basically Speedlancers or freelancers who are creating workflows, basically using their insider knowledge, their tacit knowledge, their exposure to the problems to construct workflows of a high quality that we wouldn't be able to come up with.
That's right. That's right. And in fact, I do a lot of work thinking about governments, and you may have heard of nudge units. There's also another, so that's the use of behavioural insights to try to make things work better. There's also a bunch of centres in the United Kingdom called What Works centres, and what they're trying to do, they're often collaborations with universities, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to provide nuggets of knowledge about what works, in schools and in all the things that governments get involved with. But the problem, I think, and I've written some stuff about this, is that what they do is they think that the upper middle class and the Harvard graduates and the Oxford graduates and so on can cruise around and suck useful, usable knowledge out of all that work that's going on, and say, if you introduce a singing in schools program in your school, it will improve well-being this much and marks this much and so on. And just saying that, it sounds a bit silly, really. And so one of the things I've been talking to them in England and also here, and one of the metrics, one of the most important things I think is that if these things are going to be done well, you can ask this question: have the people who've solved the problem been promoted? Have they gained more resources? Have they done better than the people who didn't solve too many problems, who just sat at the top of the system doing data science crunches? If most work and most knowledge, if a huge amount of it is tacit, then you're not going to get very far with just the data science. You actually need all these skills that are virtually impossible to codify. That's what we're finding out with AI. And that's, again, another great challenge for Speedlancer, because there are lots of great ways in which encoded knowledge in software and management systems can help support the tacit knowledge, can help nurture it, hold it, mobilize it, but it's not the thing itself. And so I would hope that people who've done amazing things on Speedlancer end up having a lot of say about what the next thing Speedlancer is going to do and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, building a career out of a freelancing platform.
Absolutely, absolutely. Building a life that someone might really want to live.
Yeah.
And it's fine as a freelancing platform as well, but I think that this is, I think that our best clients are going to want more than just a few freelancers running around.
100%. That, I think I'm coming close to the end of my questions. Do you have any closing remarks or a message that you'd like to finish with?
I sort of, the last answer I gave you is a bit like that, which is, come one, come all. If you've got something great you want to do, maybe there's a fit between you and Speedlancer. And that's going to excite me more than getting Paul Graham on the share register, though I'd love to have him on the share register.
Maybe you can write a guest post, guest essay.
Yeah, that'd be good too.
That'd be ideal.
I don't know. My career is so unusual that I'm not... Yeah. Well, we've had a number of discussions about this, Adam, and for me, a lot of the stuff I do kind of needs personal. So if I want someone to maybe do copywriting, which I haven't ever commissioned out, I've never commissioned copywriting, I've done it myself, but I can't, I think I need to create relationships with the people who are going to service me, and that's not really a workflow. So it doesn't look like I'm a direct client of Speedlancer, but it's an interesting question. And
Not necessarily client, it could be you as a
yeah,
as a worker.
yeah. Well, I think you're at the beginning of that. I cringe at the.
I'm not intentionally, of course. I'm not.
No. But you're at the beginning. You're at the beginning of that. With I cringe at the term thought of myself as a thought leader, but you're at the beginning of that with your thought leader workflow. That's beginning to be something that could be useful to me. I mean, I'm someone who needs someone to take me in hand and say, here are all the things you're not thinking about because your head's somewhere else. We'll look after that. So, people have those, that's called an EA, but we could do much better than an EA when you think about it, because you could have your EA for copywriting and you'd have a sort of and I'm just thinking aloud, but you would have some kind of coordinator, and then they would be facilitating links with all kinds of people who had terrific insights and terrific capacity to add value. Don't think it'd be easy to do, and I don't think it would necessarily be a core thing for us to hunt down in the short term. But it's just the sort of thing, a hard project that could be really quite interesting and valuable. Imagine a sort of not a virtual EA, but a super EA. So that's the Speedlancer platform gives us the ability to make those things look like more than just shooting the breeze. It sounds like the sort of thing that you could definitely take to the next meeting and say, we'll do some experiments with this and let's see if we can do it.
Are there any other points or questions that you think are worth exploring?
I can't think of anything. I'm a bit tired, but I no doubt we'll think of them after we've finished. The French call that esprit de l'escalier, all those things you think about as you're going up the stairs, but I can't think of anything at the moment.